Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to be talking about the HRE and why was it so dysfunctional. I got Knowledgia walking us through this, and if you're new here, this is what we do. We react to history. We learn more about history. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Lego.
Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire. Neither holy nor Roman nor empire.
And we're already going to pause because this is probably one of the most famous quotes about the HRE by Voltaire.
Truly though, it seems that the Holy Roman Empire existed as no more than a weak attempt to revive the glory of what once was. The HRE really was pretty inadequate, relatively at least. So then, how did the successor of the magnificent Roman Empire turn out so incredibly bad? One reason that many historians often point to is the fact that the Holy Roman Emperor was actually, for the most part, an elected official. At the birth of the empire in the 9th century, the emperor was chosen by the Pope, beginning with Charlemagne. Over the next few centuries, this continued to be the case, generally speaking, although the role was more or less hereditary for a good chunk of time between.
And everyone knows Charlemagne's like the father of Europe. So this all began, and it really began, I'm not sure, please let me know if I'm mistaken, but this really allowed the church and the politics to kind of start to mend together even more, especially with, the blessing of the Pope. There's a famous example of Napoleon, obviously, not allowing the Pope to place thy crown upon thy head and to do it himself. And we also see the breakup of, with Henry VIII. And the creation of Church of England versus the Catholic Church. So there's rifts amongst this, but it begins obviously here with Charlemagne.
Between the 9th and 13th centuries. Then, in the 13th century, the Pope allegedly requested that the emperor instead be elected by a group of prince-electors within the empire. These prince-electors were split into two categories, the secular electors and spiritual electors.
Okay, so we got Mainz, Trier, Cologne, Brandenburg, Saxony, Bohemia, and a Palatinate. Okay.
The secular electors were, of course, local rulers within the empire, whose own positions were hereditary. The spiritual electors, on the other hand, were chosen by cathedral chapters and served as both religious and local leaders over their own territories under the Holy Roman Empire. Together, these two groups would vote to elect the new monarch, and the Pope would then officially crown the nominee as emperor for the following few centuries. Near the end, when the Habsburg family came to power as the Holy Roman Emperors, the elections were mostly just a formality, and the title was essentially hereditary on everything other than paper. But
we need to learn a little bit more about the Habsburgs and their rise to power and their collective power over Europe. Obviously, one of the most famous families and dynasties of all time. Need to learn a little bit more about them.
Nonetheless, it was still officially an elected position. This detail in itself isn't exactly a smoking gun in the case of why the empire was so messy, but it's still a factor that is often cited as a contribution. This circumstance also goes hand in hand with the next red flag that historians seem to really focus on, the decentralization of the empire. While decentralization itself wasn't necessarily a sign of doom, it did contribute heavily to the lack of authority that the emperor often actually had.
Wait, Spain controlled that particular portion? That's insane to me. Given the geography where Spain is today, that's just crazy to me.
The reason people often feel that the HRE wasn't actually an empire has a lot to do with this detail, and the fact that the emperor seemed to be the head of a confederation-like entity, more than even an empire and its vassals. To give one example, the Holy Roman Empire didn't even have one fixed capital city. Instead, the empire was actually an amalgamation of dozens and eventually hundreds of individual entities with their own local leaders who had their own authority and whose authority often actually restricted that of the emperor. By the end of the 30 Years' War, this fact became even more apparent with the Peace of Westphalia. which recognized the independence, both religiously and politically, of Holy Roman member states. Even before this agreement, though, the decentralized state of the HRE was undoubted and often contributed to a lack of unity and an essence of union or confederation more than the empire. This alone makes the Holy Roman Empire appear to be a bit of a mess, but again, there's more that contributed to the inadequacy as a whole. Religious discord, ironically, was another significant reason for the disordered state of the empire. Following the Protestant Reformation, the HRE became home to a mixture of Catholic and Protestant states, and
which is very interesting given the origins of the HRE with Charlemagne and the Catholic Church.
Conflict was seemingly inevitable. The Peace of Augsburg was consequently signed between Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire and the Schmalkaldic League in September of 1555, in hopes of suppressing any religious disputes within the empire. For the most part, the treaty was successful at preventing any violent conflicts between the Roman Catholics and German Lutherans of the empire, and it granted all member states the freedom to choose between the two religions, but it also further damaged any image or feeling of unity under the emperor. The treaty wasn't well respected by a certain emperor either. When Ferdinand II found himself on the Holy Roman throne, he tried to enact a counter-reformation, and not so subtly, forced Roman Catholicism on his people. This triggered the series of events that would eventually lead to the 30 Years' War, which pitted the Holy Roman Emperor against many of his own people.
I didn't know that. That's an interesting fun fact. I'm glad I did this video. I did not know the 30 Years' War was pretty much an effect of Ferdinand II's decree.
The war threw Europe into turmoil and truly fractured the HRE. Even worse, the series of treaties to end the war, as previously mentioned, was the Peace of Westphalia, which officially solidified the emperor's existence as more or less just a symbolic position. By this point, the combination of drastic decentralization, the odd process of electing emperors, whether figurative or not, and now the unfixable religious disunity was deeply weakening the Holy Roman Empire. This proved to be fatal then, when Napoleon decided to take on the crumbling imperial state.
So we're already in the 1800s, or right before the 1800s.
With the HRE barely holding itself together as any kind of united entity, Napoleon had already begun breathing down its neck after the
Confederation, the Rhineland, is going to be coming up really quickly.
Treaty of Lunéville gave multiple Holy Roman territories over to France. Still, there had remained some, even if dwindling, sense of unity within the Holy Roman Empire throughout the French Revolutionary Wars, which saw Prussia come to the aid of the Emperor as probably the most important player on the Emperor's side. But when Prussia eventually withdrew its support due to more pressing priorities in its Polish territories, the fate of the HRE became even grimmer. As the empire scrambled to reorganize and rebuild its political and imperial prowess while making peace with France, a new problem arose with Napoleon's coronation as Emperor of the French.
Okay, so we're in 1804.
In 1804. While a previous agreement had already been made, which established a hierarchy where the Holy Roman Empire was intended to remain the ultimate authority in Europe, many within the HRE, and the Austrians in particular, felt that Napoleon taking the imperial title was an undeniable threat. Still, they knew that refusing to acknowledge his new status, which had already been accepted by the Pope, would only mean a new war with the French. In response, Francis II of the Holy Roman Empire declared himself to now also be the Emperor of Austria.
And we saw that happen. So now, of course, we're just coming off of the Napoleonic series, so that's why it's so fresh on my mind. But you're going to see Austria really take this leverage from Francis II being the HRE emperor, kind of like parlaying into him being the Austrian emperor, which is going to start that coalition.
Though reluctantly, conflict broke out yet again between Austria and France in the War of the Third Coalition, which resulted in an even more complicated shuffle of territories, thanks to the Peace of Pressburg. Finally, on August 1st, 1806, Napoleon declared that he no longer recognized the legitimacy of the Holy Roman Empire.
And there's the Confederation of the Rhine, which is going to stay up until Leipzig, like 1813.
This came after a handful of German states within the HRE had formed the Confederation of the Rhine the month prior. And those states too issued a proclamation alongside Napoleon, stating that the Holy Roman Empire was no longer an empire anyway, and had collapsed long ago due to the outcome of the Battle of Austerlitz. Not even a week later, Francis II, the final emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, abdicated his throne and dissolved the imperial entity entirely. As drastic as it may seem now, Francis's decision to topple his own empire was actually not as unpredictable as one may think. In fact, he had already decided that whenever it best benefited Austria, he would do just that. This mindset is a good example of why the Holy Roman Empire appears to have been such a mess, and in many ways, a defective empire.
And it seems that, Francis II really just took power arbitrage, which means he hopped from one power vacuum to another power vacuum. It might not be a power vacuum, but what I'm trying to say, he's used his leverage with his power to gain influence, to grow as the Austrian emperor, because he saw the writing on the wall. As he spoke about, the HRE was a declining refuge of states that really just sought to be more or less almost like independent states. Confederations or unity of an empire was long past since the days of the actual HRE. But give it the credit, like symbolically or unified, it was a 1,000-year reign. The HRE was, and they tried to, of course, and everyone has really. You can see anyone that takes the power, they always look back to like the Roman Empire, or Macedonia, or other places as well, when it comes to like trying to create a vast territory of statehood, because that's really what they had to look up to.
The title of Emperor of the Romans was about prestige more than anything else, which is why the layout of the empire as a confederation type was tolerable. This, though, as mentioned at the beginning, played a significant role in the disunity and ultimate demise of the empire. Even at the very end, it was the sovereignty of the territories within the empire that allowed the German states to negotiate with and eventually align with Napoleon. Additionally, the religious conflict brought about by the Protestant Reformation was poorly addressed by the often absentee emperors, and truly gives irony to the holy part of the Holy Roman Empire. Really, the only thing holy or even Roman about it was the role of the Pope in confirming the election of each emperor. But this didn't even last through the entire existence of the HRE. The combination of decentralization, religious conflict, internal and external disputes, and other oddities all contributed to why the Holy Roman Empire was as disordered as it was. The reason why it was so bad, especially near the end, to the point of betrayal by member states and the emperor himself, was due to a simple lack of care. Since the title was mostly on—
I would say lack of care. I would just say it's really hard to take all those different individual states and suppress them into unity. And when I say suppress them into unity, it really it's like a combined nature of having states be independent but also be dependent at the same time. It's very difficult to do that.
Honorary, it served the imperial rulers such as Francis II better to prioritize their other territories and kingdoms. There wasn't much motivation to risk Napoleon declaring war or attempting to seize the Holy Roman crown to defend an empire that really only existed as such in name.
True. And it's kind of ironic how, one empire taketh another empire, right? So because like when the French Emperor Napoleon takes over, it's almost like it's like a full circle moment with Charlemagne began the empire and Napoleon basically dissolved it through conquest. It's kind of cool, but kind of interesting at the same time. But then ironic at the same part, these individual states that are looking to possibly seek not revolution, but independence, and granted independence to become the Confederation of the Rhine until 1813-ish. And then eventually they become Germany and other places as well. So very cool video. The one thing about Knowledgia videos, if you've noticed, is it's a very much high point, superficial, summarized cliff note type video. There's so much content that we could dive into here with the HRE, whether it be the individual states, the emperors, the geography, the wars, etc. But this is more or less like a 30,000 foot view versus a minute, what do you call it? Long story short, it's a 30,000 foot view. So it gives us a little bit of a fifth grade educational version, which is good sometimes, right? Especially when you're not nuanced, but especially when you're novice in some of these areas, like I am. You need to grab a lot of this context before we go into a Harvard professor documentary, which I would definitely want to do at the same time. It doesn't have to just be through Harvard. I love college. I've watched a lot of college courses before online. It's kind of fun because you have professors that are uniquely storytellers as well, that kind of give their nuanced opinions on the such. That's all I got to say about this, guys. I have homework for you in the comments. In your opinion, when did the Holy Roman Empire end? I'm not talking about 1806 or whatever it was. I'm not talking about after Napoleon conquered this area. I'm talking about, like, when did it become symbolic versus actual? Was it ever actual? Let me know. And don't just put like a year. Put like put the year or the time, and also put like why you think that, or what made it that transition. I always appreciate everyone watching this video, especially you right there. Leave a like, drop a comment as I spoke about, drop a different comment, leave a video recommendation, and as always, hit that subscribe button. Peace out. Bye bye.